Okay, can we be straight for a second? Peter Attia is like a way handsomer and smarter version of me. He's a friend of mine. We go back to the Stanford days. He does a lot of stuff on nutrition, and he came up with a framework that I read recently that I was like, that's brilliant. I'm stealing it, and I'm going to tell the Z-Pack about it, and this is it. Anything you think about when it comes to diet or nutrition or how to eat, how to lose weight, how not to be sick because you're eating crap can be reduced to a simple analogy. You're pulling 3 potential levers in your diet at any time. One of the levers is calorie restriction. In other words, how much you eat. That's simple. The more calories you eat, the more potential you have to gain weight. Or if you're exercising a lot, you may need more calories. Okay, so calorie restriction's lever 1. Cha-ching! Nothing's coming out of my slot machine. Lever 2 is dietary restriction. Now, what does that mean? Dietary restriction means what you eat. Lever 1 was how much you eat. Lever 2 is what you eat. So when you think about vegan diet, vegetarian diet, South Beach diet, keto diet, Mediterranean diet, all of those are restricting big groups of foods that you don't eat. So in the keto diet, you don't eat carbohydrates. In the vegan diet, you don't eat animal products. And so by restricting entire categories of food, you alter your diet, and therefore your response to the diet, your metabolism, how many overall calories might be actually consumed might actually be affected by that as well. So the third lever is time restriction. That's when you eat. So if you do one of these intermittent fasting diets where you're eating, normally on most days, but then on 2 days you're restricting your calories dramatically, or you're fasting for 5 days, or you're doing something like that, that is a time-restricted feeding. People who eat 1 meal a day, like myself, are doing time restriction. So you have these 3 levers. They all do different things. So time restriction has to do with things like autophagy, where it's regulating sort of cellular mechanisms of breakdown and things like that that may have beneficial effects, insulin resistance, things like that. Dietary restriction may restrict categories of food that affect how you secrete insulin and different responses depending on your genetics and your behavior. And then calorie restriction, how much you eat. So the basic teaching is this. It's so simple, and yet kind of hard to pull off sometimes. You should always, if you don't want to be sick, okay, by the way, if you want to be sick, don't pull any levers ever. That's called the standard American diet, and it's killing many, many, many people worldwide, America. If you want to do the right thing, you should always be pulling at least one lever. Often, you should be pulling 2 of the levers, and occasionally, you may want to pull all 3 of the levers. And I'll explain an example real quick. So if you always want to pull a lever, pick a diet that you think is sustainable, whether it's Mediterranean, whether it's vegetarian, whatever it is, and kind of roll with that. Or you can just pull the time restriction, eat 1 meal a day in a narrow window. You're pulling one lever all the time. But pretty often you'll want to do other things like restrict another lever, like dietary restriction and time restriction. But then every now and again, let's say you had a rough Christmas season, I don't know, gain some weight. You may want to pull all 3 levers. And that can mean a prolonged fast. Maybe it's a 2-day or a 3-day water fast or minimum calorie fast, followed by a return to pulling at least 1 lever or 2 levers. And by doing that, you can actually kind of really regulate weight, metabolic consequences of what you eat, and be healthier, happier, etc., especially when you combine it with good sleep, with good social connections, and with some exercise. And so it's really not that complicated. Obviously, you would avoid the time restriction and the calorie restriction levers if you have a problem with an eating disorder. So you customize it for every individual. That's why there's no one right answer. It's all dependent on who you are. All right? So go out there, pull some mother flipping levers, and get swole, or at least less sick. If we can at least do that as Americans, we're going to save a ton in healthcare costs. We're going to be happier, healthier, and more productive. All right. Thanks, Peter Attia, for this great idea. You're balder and beautifuler than me, and I love you, and we out. Peace.
Boom. Time restriction. All right, let's get into it. Only eat Oreos between the hours of 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Calorie restriction. You can only eat 4,700 calories of Oreos a day. Dietary restriction, only Oreos. It's pretty simple. That's the Oreo diet, son.
This guy right here.
Body by Oreos. You know what I'm saying?
He's like my star student. He really is. Look at him.
I'm pulling those levers, bruh. Just pulling them. I wanted to eat 9,000 calories of Oreos, but I only ate 4,700. Because that's the Oreo diet. I have discipline.
Discipline.
Discipline, bitch.
Discipline.